All right. Some coffee, tea, water, anything?
Just water, please.
Sure.
Whoop.
Apple, banana?
No, I'm good, thank you.
You sure?
Yes, I'm good.
You didn't want to eat on camera?
No, I just had lunch. Thank
Okay. Thank you for coming in today. So here's how this is going to run today. Have you had time to look at your spot?
I did, yes.
From me?
Yes.
I have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask you to give me as much thought as you can.
Okay.
Then I'm going to talk about what I think are real leverage points in your classroom, and then we're going to come together on an action plan about next steps.
Okay.
Feel free to ask me any questions that you have, and I really want this to be a growing conversation. I'm going to set the stage where I think you're a fantastic teacher. I've shared that with you on many, many occasions, and you're one of those teachers that I think can really benefit from good conversation, because you're really good, and I want you to be great.
Right.
And
And that feedback.
you're right here.
Right.
The feedback piece is where I think that greatness can come.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to be pointed about some things today.
Okay.
I want you to be pointed about some things. If you don't think they're correct, I want you to come right back at me. Okay.
You know.
My first question: what might be some thoughts about how you thought the lesson went?
I think overall, I think it went well.
Okay.
I thought about a few things that I could have added to it, but I think the students were well engaged. They enjoyed the reading. Science is fun for them anyway, so I think they enjoyed the reading, so that was helpful. And then they always like working in small groups and being able to talk to their peers. And so I think that really worked well for them as well. I do want to work with them on how to work in small groups. That is something that we're still kind of practicing, because that is something that they are still trying to learn and figure out, especially when they have differences of opinions or answers. So resolving that conflict and being able to respectfully discuss back and forth is something that we're still working on. So I'm trying to give them as much group time as possible so that they can kind of figure that out.
Okay.
But I think it went well. The warm-up was good because it gave them the background, especially since they hadn't had it for a couple of days. So it kind of brought it back to the forefront for them. So, but I think overall it went fairly well. And it was timed pretty good too. I was afraid I was going to go over. So I was glad that it timed out right. So, what do you think?
Before I tell you what I think, I want you to dig in a little bit deeper. Think about your instructional practices that you're using that day.
Okay.
Now, we did this Monday, this lesson? Wednesday? Sorry, all my things have come together. On Wednesday, so you've had at least 48 hours or so to think about it. Think about your instructional practices that you used that day. How do you think your choosing of those instructional practices went? How do you think your sequencing of that went? You talked about a little bit about going long, a really effective lesson plan. You know exactly how long it's going to take you. Just dig a little bit deeper on that for me.
Can you clarify
Sure.
instructional practices?
Your use of checks for understanding, where you put how you used timers, how you used your warm-up that day, your choice of using a small group activity as opposed to whole group activity, as opposed to individual reading activity. You chose to put that lesson together the way you did for a purpose. Just, I want you to kind of verbalize that a little bit for me.
Okay.
I want you to be uncomfortable with this a little bit.
Okay. So I like using the quasas, which is what the warm-up was. I think that gives them a very good layout of how to process their own thinking.
Okay.
So that I think is very effective for students, because it still runs them through their thought process and helps them formulate their answers a little bit more. It gives them a starting point. Randomization, I could use those more often, and the checks for understanding.
Okay.
I did realize that I did not check in with as many kids as I probably should have. I tried to do.
Let's hone in right there.
Okay.
A, why do you think that happened? And B, why do you think it's important that you do that?
I think it happened just because I was trying to stay on track and wanting to keep things moving. And it's important because I want to make sure that, I want to make sure 100% of the kids understand the concept. And so that those multiple checks for understanding, making sure that they're seeing each level of the lesson and how we're running through those pieces is important. And I do have a tendency to call on the ones that, are raising their hands and are actively engaged. So making a point to call on the ones or touch base with the ones that are not actively engaged, or I can tell as we're sharing out as a group are not focused or not paying attention to what is going on with the rest of the classroom. So really making a point to make sure I'm touching base with them. So checks for understanding is one that I tend to forget about.
So QASA does a randomization for you. How did you pick, but it doesn't randomize so that you get everybody.
No.
How did you pick that share out birthdays?
Right, it was birthdays.
She just picked birthdays.
I just picked birthdays. Sometimes I do birthdays, sometimes I do popsicle sticks. I've also done glasses, no glasses, red shirts, all different types of things. If you play sports or if you don't play sports, if you have a dog, you don't have a dog. I've pulled all of those different types of things to try and pull the different students. Things. Right.
And I think that's great. I think in the feedback I shared with you that 7 Steps was really on point that day. I love it.
It's something that I use quite a bit.
And you can tell. I think the next step of that is, instead of just pulling something random for you, birthdays, glasses, whatever, is that extra planning piece of, if I'm looking for these 3 kids to participate that day, what could be my strategy to get them within a QASA?
But then does that really become randomization?
So when I'm talking about randomization and checks for understanding together, you can still make sure that you're randomizing your classroom, but we're always key on those specific kids as well. One great strategy is on our popsicle sticks, that very, very often we don't get through our bucket of popsicle sticks. Randomization is good that way, but sometimes I just don't get to it. Putting a little red dot on the top of our popsicle sticks of the kids that I really want to make sure that I get to. It may not be random. The idea of randomization, though, is not necessarily that I'm going to get every kid, but every kid thinks I'm going to get every kid.
Okay.
So every kid is like, I got to be on point today. I got to really be paying attention to what Miss Nelson is. Oh, she just picked up the popsicle sticks. I got a pretty good shot about getting my name called. And so they're focused in and are going to be able to give you the answer. Just having the popsicle stick. No, I'm with
that it would. It's supposed to be just a random chance.
And I'm not telling you not to do the random chance. Being purposeful within our randomization can be key as well. And I'm going to call random sticks, but I also know that Johnny and Toby and Sally, they struggle with this concept. And if I can make sure that at some point within my randomization I'm calling on these 3 kids, that's a key point. What I really hate is for 3 weeks in a row, it just so happens that your randomization strategy is not calling on Toby. Right? Because Toby doesn't wear glasses and he doesn't have a birthday that ends in Y or whatever, right?
It misses.
Hey, I haven't heard from this kid. I'm going to make sure that today this is what I'm going to do. Okay? And being purposeful about that. So now that you thought about it, you shared a couple things. What would you change about your lesson?
A couple of things that came to mind were changing up my small grouping a little bit, and it's something that I do some of the time, as to who I pull to the front to be able to either read it to them. A lot of times that depends on the reading comprehension passage that I'm using. Sometimes it's a larger group, sometimes it's just the 3 students that I pulled that day. And those are my 3 biggest concerns when it comes to my reading levels, based on their Dibble scores and their STAR data. So those are the ones I kind of always pull, and then my other is my behavior friend. So
how are you actively using Dibbles and STAR data to group those?
Yes. Yes.
So the groups that you had in that classroom on Wednesday, they were specifically grouped with data in mind?
They were.
Okay.
My table groups have data in mind. Now, granted, I will put higher ones in as well to help guide those conversations.
As long, my question is centered on, are you using data to group your kids?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good.
Yes. Yeah, to putting those together. So the small reading groups and pulling those kids is a big one that I would like to work on. And then adding vocabulary more often to my lessons. I did notice, especially in science, there's so much vocabulary, and we work so hard on trying to understand that vocabulary and use that vocabulary. But I know in the future I want to add that vocabulary probably to the DOL. So as an example, writing in the DOL, using a vocabulary word from today's lesson, make sure, write a short answer response answering the following question. So my DOL for this activity was compare and contrast Aristotle and Linnaeus. But I should have put in there using the vocabulary word classification or taxonomy or one of the kingdom domains, something like that. So making sure I'm adding that vocabulary in there to make these more vocabulary rich lessons, as well as giving them maybe that vocabulary ahead of time. Okay. So that way they can go ahead and they can have that as kind of a front load, and that's where I think Google Classroom can really come into play. And it's something that we've started using, and the kids are loving using Google Classroom. They love it when we post the videos up there, and they're math videos or they're science videos for them to watch, but it's giving them still those learning experiences. So adding the vocabulary up there in some way, so that way parents know what's going on as well in the classroom. That was something in conferences today I got, is I don't always know what's going on in the classroom because the kids don't tell me anything.
They don't.
So putting that up there as well, so adding that vocabulary more in, because that's one of the power standards that we're struggling with.
So if I can paraphrase, working on changing your small groups. You do this sometimes, the changing sometimes, but you're always active in using the data to group them. Using vocabulary in a more purposeful way, even including front loading. Also using Google Classroom to do some of the things that you don't have time in the day to do.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think those are all great. In fact, the idea of front loading vocabulary, when we talk about the lesson plan later, when we talk about exemplary teaching, that's the 2 weeks out, and I know I'm going to be teaching these things 2 weeks from now. I'm going to send home our vocabulary sheet this week. Okay. That's going to be containing some of those things that are, I'm going to start front loading those things, because we're going to talk about estimate and being precise and the word domain, the word taxonomy. I'm going to front load those in today because I know they're going to need it 2 weeks from now. That's where exemplary planning starts coming into place. Okay?
Where do you think the accountability then comes in for those kids with that vocabulary to front load that?
Give me more. What does that mean?
So if I set that vocabulary out 2 weeks ahead of time and let them know, hey, this is what's coming up 2 weeks down the pipe for us to be doing in our science lessons. Okay. How do I hold them accountable for knowing that they are looking at the vocabulary, they're using that vocabulary, or they're practicing it in some way, just so that I know that they're being exposed to it more than just maybe glancing at it?
What do you think?
I mean, they could be writing sentences for it, using it in sentence form ahead of time. I don't know. That's why I was...
That's why you asked the question?
Yes, because I don't know where to go with that, with the exception of giving them the list of the vocabulary and the definitions and saying, here you go, this is coming down the pipeline. Okay. So how do I ensure that they're looking at that and taking that ahead of time?
You teach really, really well. Comma. And what I mean by that is, you started this conversation by saying, my kids really love science, and they really love engaging in it. I would imagine if you told kids that in order to do their best in your science lesson 2 weeks from now, that you need to become familiar with this background knowledge. I mean,
or the activity
or whatever it may be,
okay.
that they, for the most part, will be wanting to do this for Miss Nelson.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be, for the most part, wanting to do this for themselves because, hey, in order for me to get the most out of my cool science lesson I'm going to do, I need to do these things. What I hear from 5th grade is your kids are pretty much doing those
mm-hmm.
things. Have the intrinsic motivation so that they can get the learning because learning is interesting and the lessons are done well for kids. And so I wouldn't, every study in the world tells us that the big difference between the abilities of kids to process and use information in a school setting, a lot of it comes back down to background knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
The kids whose parents took them to museums and read to them when they were
mm-hmm.
young and live in neighborhoods where the words that they see in their neighborhoods are not one word signs but extensive literacy, as opposed to poor neighborhoods
mm-hmm.
that say pawn shop here.
Mm-hmm.
That those are the kids who do better in school. And so
if
you've done nothing but expose kids to the words before they've got there, I'm probably asking you to do a little bit more than just expose them
mm-hmm.
to it. But the exposure itself
minimum, right.
is going to help kids be successful. When you look at your tier 2 kids that you're pulling in win time and that you're small grouping, being more purposeful with those
mm-hmm.
and saying taxonomy is a tough word.
Mm-hmm.
And having conversations with those parents and saying, in order for your student to be successful in the upcoming unit, these are the words that you need to be focusing on now. I would imagine if a kid can work its way through taxonomy,
mm-hmm.
that skill is going to bleed into other words as well. There's about 55,000 English words that we teach people to use. I don't know that taxonomy is better than
right.
multiplication, but it serves the same purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
We kind of determine, hey, our spelling list or whatever it is that we're going to do, this is the word that they have to know.
Right.
Well, taxonomy is just as good a word as any other, and so I wouldn't get bogged down in what the word is. What's going to help our kid be successful in class, and then having those conversations with parents. I would have the accountability come next. But what's best for kids? How do I get it to them in a timely fashion? And where they're going to struggle. And I think we can talk about that more in the lesson plan. So the last question I have before we start talking about the notes, what might your students do differently the next time you taught this lesson? So we've been talking about you.
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to do differently? Because we talked about this. Remember, this is your property.
Right.
And you're going to dust this off next time or next year when you're going to do it.
Put my copyright at the
put your
bottom.
copyright down there at the bottom. What are kids going to do differently the next time?
I think kids are going to be more diligent in their annotation.
Okay.
More purposeful in their questions and how they're interacting with their peers.
How? Just magic? They're going to be more purposeful?
No, by practice.
Okay.
With me, and teaching them those speaking skills of how to interact with their peers, especially when they have a difference of opinion.
Okay.
So, I think I want them more engaged in the original talk piece. I'm not sure if I should give them more guidance on that original talk, and I know that we talked a little bit, and maybe we'll deal with this here in just a second, but I like to put that picture, that video ahead of my learning targets and my DOLs because I really want them to problem solve and try and figure out what that picture, what that video is really trying to tell them.
Okay.
So I don't want to give them any lane per se to go down. I want them to be able to determine the lane that they go down by having that conversation. But I also feel like I need to work with them on that piece as well.
Okay.
So I want them to be able to go down that lane or go down any lane and be able to back up their reasoning behind it.
Okay.
So.
I agree. I think that's some areas that you can work on with kids next year. Let's talk about leverage points. Because I think you're doing really, really well in your classroom. And here's where we can make some of our big gains. Continue the great work with 7 steps. I want what I saw in that classroom was some of the best 7 steps I've seen this year.
Mm-hmm.
But I want you to ratchet that up. When we look at your,
so let me ask you that on the 7 steps. I was a little bit concerned with the 7 steps. I love using the 7 steps, but I know we've had the conversation as far as we don't necessarily want to be using worksheets.
okay.
So this had a
let me get
reading
to it.
passage,
Sure.
and then it did have the talk and the write.
How do you,
So how
can
do
you
you
do 7
balance?
steps in a DOL right here?
I could do a quasa.
Do a sentence stem.
Mm-hmm.
You could figure out how to do some randomization so that kids were calling out while they were doing this. But I mean, the easiest thing that comes to me is finish the sentence. The difference between Aristotle and Linnaeus, as they classified animals, was putting expectations here, and I think I talked about that as well in there. So what is one?
But even up here with like the Venn diagram,
Sure.
and even just the reading passage itself.
I'm cool with that.
Okay.
That was good.
Because
Kids
I
have
know
to
we
read.
talked about, the less use, I guess, for lack of a better way of wording it, of worksheets, just to be doing worksheets.
So stay there.
Does that?
Worksheets to do worksheets is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Worksheets to align student thinking to create a work product, I'm 100% with.
Okay.
I mean, is there a difference between a worksheet and you telling kids to
Fill this out.
write 5 boxes on their own notebook paper and filling in those boxes, as opposed to you doing the boxes for them on a piece of paper and handing it to them? The handing it to them is a worksheet.
Right.
If you put a cool header on it that says lesson 1.25 and then 5 boxes and they have to put their thinking in the 5 boxes as opposed to them writing, there's really no difference except for the mechanism in which they get the 5 boxes. What I don't want is we're going to use the 5 boxes because we use the 5 boxes.
Okay.
And the 5 boxes is there. We don't use worksheets for worksheet's sake, but what do I want the outcome of the student product to be?
Okay.
That's what I want you to be focused on.
Okay.
And if that is using a piece of paper that have boxes on it in order
Right.
to get kids to think about something,
Okay.
that's okay. Have you seen, what is it called? I can't think about it. It's the fancy name for the thinking maps. You seen thinking
Yes.
maps?
Yes.
Thinking maps is a worksheet,
Yes.
right? It's a worksheet because I've set the template for you, and now I'm asking you to do something with it.
Okay.
However, thinking maps, at least this is what Thinking Maps Corporation tells us, is it helps kids organize their thinking, because you can take that and then do something with it.
Okay.
So
it's a tool.
even back here on your talk, read, talk, write, having them use a Venn diagram, I'm okay with.
Right.
In fact, I think using a Venn diagram is a great strategy for kids.
Okay.
The next step of exemplary teaching is, now that I have my Venn diagram,
What
what
do
the
I
hell
do
are we
with
going
it?
to do with it?
Right. Which is probably a writing piece.
Which is
Okay.
not
A
probably
persuasive-
a writing piece, it's a writing piece.
Right.
How do you-
Maybe a persuasive.
And how do you get there, from here to there with your DOL, with your writing piece?
Okay.
I think the talk, read, talk, write part, I think you skipped over the right part in your
Okay.
lesson.
Okay.
They did some of it, but, and you probably didn't have enough time within the 50 minutes that I was in there, which that's okay too. I know
Right.
you were trying to make a formal lesson,
Right.
but
To
hey,
extend
now
that
that
out
we've done
even to
this,
2 days.
hey, you guys got another 15 minutes. 15 minutes, we're gonna write what this means. Your DOL today, so DOLs should be short and quick and easy for you to do. Sometimes they're not, because I've asked you, I'm gonna start you off. Here's your sentence stem for your writing. Aristotle and Linnaeus classified organisms differently by, and then you need to give me 2 more paragraphs
Okay.
using your Venn diagram.
Okay.
That might give you some work tonight to do.
Right.
Good
And
deal.
that can be part of my DOL, is it?
Good
It
DOL,
can
sure.
bring it in the next. Okay. My understanding of DOLs a lot of times was always that it had to be to end that and kind of be that finishing point and be done at the end of that lesson, and it needed to be right then and there.
Could we do that though?
If we had enough, if I had an extra 10 minutes at
So-
the end of the class, yes.
Could you, to answer your metrics of a DOL, could it be done right then and there?
Yeah.
Yep, because it would take 15 minutes, but still be done right then and there.
Right.
Could it have ended your lesson?
Mm-hmm.
A matter of your availability, but could you have checked it quickly to determine whether or not kids got it?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
You could
I'm
scan
not,
through it, yeah.
I'm not asking you to read every essay and provide extensive formal feedback, but could you have, I sat in a meeting with second grade the other day and they were looking at an essay and they were able to,
Yeah.
I'm looking for 4 words. I'm looking for whatever the words that Aristotle used, I'm looking for whatever the words Linnaeus used, looking for a couple periods and a couple of capital letters. Yeah, my kids got this today. Now I can go back and do a formal grading of their writing conventions, but I know my kids got it today, right?
Okay.
One of the reasons why we say short, sweet, and to the point DOLs is because you got 6 or 7 of them to do in a day. If you want to have an extensive DOL and you think that taxonomy is really important for kids to understand, let's have them do it. Let's have them do the right part.
Okay.
And you can.
More extensively.
Why
Okay.
not? But use the 7 steps. Focus on TRTW. This is really where your wheelhouse can be.
Okay.
The other leverage point is this how you plan your lesson? Okay. I want you to think about planning in a different way. It's not an expectation, but a formal lesson plan. Amber does this the same way. I didn't see, because I only got this part. Do you use the notes piece?
Yes.
Okay. I want you to use the notes piece a little bit more extensively
Okay.
and be very purposeful about where you're inserting things that you need to insert.
Okay.
I'm going to differentiate for groups
Right.
here and not just think about it.
Right.
There is, as we know with kids, there is something that works on us to take it from here to put it on a piece of paper. This is some of the pushback we've gotten from teachers of, well, that just takes a lot of time to put it on paper. Yeah, it does. However,
Well, and you got the digital file of this, correct? Okay.
that's what I printed out. I didn't see any notes with it.
It's in the digital file,
Okay.
and then all you have to do is print it a different way,
Okay.
and those notes will print with it.
Maybe I got something sent differently because I know how to look for the notes and I couldn't see the notes.
Okay.
That's not, that's here nor there.
Right.
What I'm asking you to look at is being very purposeful. For this activity, I'm going to check for understanding this way,
Okay.
making sure that I pay attention to Johnny, Tony, and Sally.
Okay.
Okay, and then the next one, I'm going to be very purposeful about my differentiation today. I'm going to check on John and Meg and Michelle because I know that during the writing portion of this, they struggle with that. Or I know that those 3 kids really love to write and I need to rein them in a little bit because they only got 15 minutes and they're going to write these 19 paragraphs.
Right.
That's what I want. I want you to
Roll them in. Okay.
plan purposefully.
Okay.
That's really the difference between good teachers and exemplary teachers.
Okay.
Is when you look at the exemplary teachers' plan books, they've got binders that are this thick because they spent a lot of time thinking about it, scratching things out, moving back. Hey, I looked at this new data. We've tried something new.
Okay.
And then for the last leverage point, planning to get to all your groups all the time. Did you see that remark I made?
Yeah, I did.
Was that purposeful?
No.
Did you get caught up with the kids?
I got caught up.
That's okay too.
And the conversation that they were having and going back and forth.
If you had planned another CFU for that, because I know you were with that group.
Do you remember which group it was?
It was so I was sitting at the table at that point. It was not the group that was right here to the right of me, but the group that was to the right of me.
Okay, so the reason, now that makes sense, because I had another group that was not working well together, and so I was dealing with that as well. But that group right there, they were struggling with their conversation, and so
I saw what you were doing.
And the answer I was getting from 3 of the 4 kids was, well, what Caden said. I agree with what Caden said.
I'm with you 100%. Plan your CFU
to know
so that you can be at that group.
Okay.
And you can hold on real quick, guys. Everybody on whiteboards real quick. I want you to do bop, 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 bop. All right, guys. So you guys don't have to worry about the whiteboards. Show up. Okay, keep going. That's what I want you to do because when you're doing that, you can still spend time with that group. Other groups might have been struggling.
Right.
You didn't get to them that time. And it's not the end of the world.
Right.
But within that activity, you did not get to every group to understand what every kid was doing. You stopped and you asked one kid from each group to share out what the group was doing in a random fashion. Good teaching.
Right.
Really good teaching. Exemplary teaching, you shouldn't even have to have the kids share out because you knew exactly where every kid in the room was at any given moment. Okay? some notes I had, because we've been talking for quite a while. He had also shared a partner that was great. We talked about you being with that group. Random call out of each group was really good too. When starting the silent read, you had a side discussion discussing the annotation strategies. That's really good. I love the use of visual timers. I'll add expectations in here as well. Having, instead of this fancy thing over here, here's your target.
But no latex on
Let me show you this. This is what my DOL looked like for every DOL I ever did. My DOL up here at the top.
Okay.
And then I had what an exemplary response would look like.
Oh, okay.
I have the expectation for that.
Okay.
Hey, you guys are going to do group work. Remember, your expectations are over here. Everybody participates, we respect each other, whatever it is.
Okay.
But you're just consistently reminding kids of that. And it doesn't take any other planning than doing it one time.
Right.
This was my lesson template that I used.
Right, and it was just over and over
I
and
just
over
copied and pasted every single time I needed.
Right.
If I needed to do a reading activity, they knew that I had my strategies on the side. When I did a whiteboard check, I knew that I had 3 differentiated questions. All I had to do was copy the slide in there and write in my questions. My pink kids were the lowest question. My blue kids were the highest question. But it didn't take any more time for me. Every time I did a Socratic seminar, I had the stuff there.
Okay, ready to go.
What is the expectation for me during this? You hit it real quick. Guys, remember, bop, bop, bop. It's up there on the board. Visual learners are seeing it as well. They keep looking up at the timer. Just formulating your practices that way.
Okay.
That's that next tier of teaching. Okay.
The next piece.
Let's talk about your spot. Any concerns that you had with the rubric? Because you did pretty well.
Yeah, I did. I think it was a good planned lesson. So
I thought it was a great lesson.
It was what I expected to be getting, and what I see as far as applying. I would agree that those are places that I can continue to work on. Target, what are you looking for differently in Target that I'm kind of not pulling in? Vocabulary?
So we talked about move the target up. You said you didn't like to do that.
Right.
I think that's a matter of preference. The reason why I would say move it up is while I have no problem with kids finding their own lane, you need to show them what the freeway looks like.
Right.
Here's what we're going to do today, and then having their brains within that.
Okay.
And being able to then start branching out from that point. But Colt had no idea why I'm watching this movie today. Again, it's a preference thing, but when we're talking about tightening things up, the lesson planning piece that I want you thinking about is I really want you to get to the piece of, does this slide deserve to be here or here? Does this activity, which activity is best for reading? Should I do it reading up front? Should I do the video first? Should I do cold call second? Those are exemplary conversations to have with yourself.
Okay.
And also, just for quibbles on the target, able to compare and contrast Aristotle's version. Compare and contrast, is that really the most rigorous thing that your kids could be doing at 5th grade? You guys are killing it with the content that you have. Compare and contrast is something, would you say that your kids get comparing and contrasting pretty well?
I think it depends on the content that they're working on. I think they still
I was
struggle
in
with
third grade class having a conversation with 3rd grade teachers. They're kind of exhausted with compare and contrast because kids get it. And so my conversation is, then why are we still comparing and contrasting?
Why are we still working on it? Yeah.
And so just a thought. How could you,
dependent on the content.
if you wanted to get to innovation, it would be about the target today where we're taking it to that next level.
Okay.
What is the next depth of knowledge from compare and contrast?
Okay. But other than that, I think they were all spot on.
Good use of closure, sticky notes on the door was good. Random calling, group shares, turn and talks. I thought this was a fantastic lesson, and you did a fantastic job. And now it's a matter of taking fantastic into whatever that next adjective is.
That next piece is. Okay.
Last question I have for you is, I want you to reflect on this conversation.
Okay.
And I want you to tell me if this has helped to support your learning in any way.
Okay.
One thing I'm doing with a lot of other teachers is doing kind of a lesson plan beforehand of our next spot, sitting down and talking to it, having that observation and then doing a post. I don't necessarily want to do that with you
Okay.
right now. I want to come and give you a couple more spots, and then I want you, I think a good action plan for us would be for you and I to go look at a couple other teachers together, and then really
See
just
how-
tinker around the edges. I'd probably rather like to see a lesson plan template from you,
Okay.
and have you write it down instead of just in the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
but
I can do
that's
that.
preference, and
Right.
I just think that would help clarify your thinking
Probably.
better than in this fashion.
In that one. Okay.
Cool,
Yeah, that's how I work off of. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Glad to be in your classroom.
Thank you. We always are glad to have you. I think the kids like having you.